The first light of morning lifts over the Barrens and spreads slowly across the horizon, turning the long grasses into a trembling sea of copper that seems to breathe with the earth itself. And the sun ascends with the deliberation of something ancient and sovereign, revealing red soil that remembers older fires and the shadows of thorn bushes that retreat as if night were a guest who finally understands that it has overstayed. Heat has not yet arrived in its full severity, yet the ground holds yesterday's blaze the way a stone keeps the last warmth of a dying ember, and each step sends a drift of dust to hang in the air like ash inside a sacred hall, while distance tricks the eye because the road narrows into a vanishing thread and the horizon withdraws with such patient dignity that measure learns humility before stride learns ache. The Barrens do not welcome, and they do not reject, they endure. And in that endurance they reveal a courtesy more honest than most kindness, because nothing here pretends to be gentler than it is, and the grasses whisper in thin voices about drought and stubbornness, and the small victories of roots, while a careful breeze carries mineral scent, sun-bruised reed, and the faint aftertaste of rain, deciding whether to trust this sky. Before the world tore itself open in the sundering, rivers stitched these flats into green, and the ground held moisture the way a song holds breath between two notes. But when the well of eternity's power shattered, the land learned a harder music and has sung its dry tones ever since. Cracked clay gleams in pale seams like a mosaic of deliberate scars, and the sky above does not feel like a ceiling so much as a vast occupation that fills every thought with light and asks your eyes to negotiate rather than command. The road underfoot is not a decree written by rulers, but a habit the land permits, because hooves and wheels and many stubborn feet have petitioned it day after day. And the Barrens, which listens to everything and answers almost nothing, allows this modest insistence to remain while returning every exhale with parity, as if the air weighs the breath and gives it back with exact change. The path is crossed by the hieroglyphs of night, split hooves, three-toed scratches and careful pads, each a small narrative the morning sun reads aloud, before the next wind edits the page clean, and the shadows trim themselves as the day sharpens until the red land steps into a stern beauty that asks for clear eyes and steady breath. Beneath these stones, magic once moved like a heartbeat, and while it sleeps now, it does not dream recklessly. Power here has learned discipline, and discipline has learned silence. The Barrens stage no performance, because they mistake spectacle for waste. And so, the sacred reveals itself in spacing and restraint, in the prudent geometry of thorn and shade, and in the sober economy of leaves that never spend what they cannot replace. The horizon organizes everything around a thin smear of road, and the promise that the next rise will offer change. Yet the next rise offers a lesson instead, because change here is measured in degrees of light rather than leaps of landscape, and dust resettles as if concluding a long debate, while the air keeps you at arm's length and still invites you forward. The pulse of the plain is slow and regular, and hurry falls from your stride, as if an unnecessary scabbard were unbuckled and set respectfully by the path, and the small percussion of stones beneath your boots teaches the rhythm to which all sensible travel should be kept until effort becomes an agreement rather than an argument. Old stories insist that forests once crossed this plain, and the ground remembers their weight the way a drum remembers the cadence of a march, even after the procession has faded, while trees that endure now practice humility and precision by counting every leaf as coin and offering shade as a contract rather than a gift. A hawk writes almost invisible circles where heat behaves like a staircase, preaching patience to anyone who looks up long enough to understand. And the road shines faintly where traffic has burnished the clay, admitting in its subtle polish the shared authorship of many travelers whose names never knew each other. Noon presses the silence flat until even insects revise their ambitions, and heat smiths the day upon an anvil of light, so that the ringing becomes a stillness that settles inside your ears until your heartbeat is the loudest machine for miles. Stories carried here are lifted by Shimmer and set down again farther on, and their pilgrimage becomes part of their truth, because the Barrens do not steal words, they resize them. The sleeping magic below behaves responsibly, and Kodo paths you will join later still ache with river memory, a tenderness that is neither complaint nor surrender, while the sky argues for infinity with such clarity that counterpoints feel childish. Endurance reveals itself as calibration rather than defiance, and success becomes a gentle agreement with reality instead of a loud victory over it. Somewhere in the deep archives of the sky, a dragon may have passed, and the light still arranges itself around the memory of wings, even when no shadow falls. The silence beneath your step is not emptiness, but a ledger of old footfalls paying interest on your passage, and each mile removes a layer of hurry to expose a cleaner geometry beneath, while the Barrens answer why with how long, and then let you keep walking until you own an answer you can carry. The last ridge of morning approaches with the implacability of a creditor, and breath pays in steady counts rather than gasps. From the crest, a slow fold of motion might be beasts or heat performing private theater, and the day opens its hand to show that map and mystery share the same palm. The road does not flatter, it simply continues, and in that continuation, you find permission to be the traveler who leaves little but learns much, while dust forgives your footprint even as it records it. Grasses bow with the choreography of prayer that never begs, and the horizon moves closer by a breath you can afford. The silhouettes on the horizon become Kodo, advancing with the measured cadence of creatures whose bodies have made a permanent treaty with distance, their hides carrying a geography of healed scars and wind-polished dust, where every line reads like a route charted across many droughts. Each footfall lands with a soft thud that the ground accepts as if a long-negotiated debt were paid on time, and the herd does not hurry because the plain has nowhere else to be, while your stride folds into their tempo so that the world feels properly synchronized for a few patient steps. The air around them holds the scent of sun-warmed hide and bruised grass, and the breeze carries that scent with the tenderness of a letter that finally reached its addressee after seasons in transit. The Thorn say the Earth Mother taught the Kodo to dream, standing up so the world would never catch them unprepared, and that lesson spilled into Tauren camps, where people learned to conserve motion until purpose arrived, and to treat silence as counsel that saves water. Totems still stand at respectful intervals along old paths, their carvings weathered into legibility by wind rather than brightened by paint, and feathers tied there lift only slightly, as if the air pauses to read the prayers before carrying them away. Wood dark with the oil of many hands holds symbols that bite with the assurance of truths that never needed ornament, while stones beneath the poles sit like elders who know when to keep quiet. These totems mark places where the herd paused and the people listened, because listening in this climate is a form of shelter, and stories move here like seeds on thin air to land where patience is fertile enough to grow them into guidance. The camps the Tauren build do not pretend to trap the wind. They invite it to pass through and leave the smoke behaving, and the ground near old hearths still settles smoother, as if it remembers the shape of rest. The Kodo graze with careful mouths that take only what the grass can spare, and the grass consents because the covenant is older than memory, and renewed with every light hoofstep over a struggling patch of green. A great bull lifts his head with a profile like a coastline drawn by a steady hand, and the land seems to recognize its own silhouette without envy, while calves stay near the safest hips and learn the road by watching the swing of elders Thorn measure wealth, not in walls, but in stories that hold through lean seasons and in shade that arrives when it should. And elders speak of seasons as instructors who grade on the curve of humility. A child once asked why the Earth Mother placed so little water here, and the answer, that thirst makes songs truthful, has walked beside the people ever since. You pass a circle of stones inset with bright bone that throws a soft light like guidance rather than glare. And at the center, a staff bound in leather casts a compass shadow that needs no needle. The herd pauses near that circle and moves on, and the dust they lift returns to exact places that will best remember it, teaching how to leave without erasing, while respect for the Kodo proves less decoration than blueprint for life in an uncompromising climate. When a Kodo dies, bones become instructions laid across the plain, and birds, sun, and apprentices learn from them without ceremony, while a shaman tracing a skull can tell a child to listen, and the child will hear stored thunder naming old storms. The Earth Mother tends these expanses like a gardener who understands scale and scarcity, rather than as a monarch craving monuments. And the Tauren walk with a rhythm shared by Kodo and distant thunder that keeps decisions honest when they grow heavy. Drumskins return the land's voice to itself, so that echoes come back tempered rather than amplified, and serpents of dust coil and settle as the herd angles toward a shallow basin where grass holds the last earnest green of the season, curving with the grace of water remembering its bed. In the stillness between hoofbeats, patience accumulates like untaxable wealth, and the herd never looks back, because the ground beneath provides adequate reasoning for forward motion. A hawk drops to evaluate calves and rises on invisible rope, spending no motion it cannot justify, and you think of orcs who learned these lessons after their arrival, guided by Tauren who taught them to read wind as ledger rather than rumor. Strength without listening becomes a drought inside armor, and the Kodo teach listening first and strength second, while dust on your boots acquires a ceremonial weight, as if the plane had stamped your travel papers without fuss. Far off, a crescent of stones suggests an old camp wrapped in a quiet that sounds like respect, choosing not to speak. One of many places where nothing remains and everything lingers. The herd's slow cloud travels with them like a private horizon until they diminish at a saddle between two ridges and become suggestion rather than proof. And silence returns with a different pitch to which your breath tunes itself. A totem leans a fraction to teach that stillness here is simply motion at honorable speed, and the sun whitens the heat while the wind thins to a ribbon that lies across the path like advice to carry less. Somewhere beyond sight, a shallow pan of water waits for herd, and people who will meet without speeches because kinship does not require inventory when the plain itself is witness, and your stride refines the tempo that respects the day's length. The next breeze brings a faint taste of green that feels like gratitude traveling light, and you resume the walk with the understanding that endurance becomes elegant when practiced in community with creatures that invented it. The plain opens, like a neatly pressed page that invites rather than commands. Your footprints appear modest enough to be welcomed, and dust closes over them with a host's courtesy. The sky expands into unarguable blue. The hawk redraws its diagram. The grasses lose pleasantly to the wind by bending without breaking, and the day lengthens into a covenant that both traveler and land can keep. The road climbs a mild rise, and the crossroads reveals itself with the unpretending confidence of a settlement that has earned every plank and post, watchtowers lifting like careful exclamation marks, while banners exhale in measured wind. The palisade declares boundary rather than boast, telling the desert it may come closer only as a neighbor, and beaten paths funnel toward a central square, where the geometry of daily life writes an old poem in footprints the sun reads each afternoon. When Thrall led his people across the sea, the Barrens offered space enough to learn honor without interruption, and the Crossroads grew from that bargain until the early map of the Horde could be traced by its gate. Orcs learned to share the plain with Thorn, who understood patience, and with trolls who kept medicine in leaves and laughter. And those lessons were carved not on tablets, but on routines that fed bellies, strapped sandals, and rebuilt trust in mornings. Merchants set wares beneath sun-bleached awnings, leather scent folding into oil from goblin winches, while a wyvern on the tower flicked its tail with the certainty of a creature that knows the distance to everything. Messages flew, perch to perch like wind-sending word, and the inn's doorway kept a stored warmth reheated by the first kettle steam, while a line of shields returned the sun in disciplined ovals, and a blacksmith lowered a hammer with the deliberation that could shoe a century. The Crossroads is more verb than noun, because arriving and departing continue each other here, and quests begin that will end in deserts, jungles, caverns, and battlefields before bending back like homing birds to this square. Thork watched with a steady eye whose understanding of order looked like the horizon on a good day, and young warriors learned not to confuse posture with pride. The first raptor any novice brought down proved less trophy than paragraph, in an education that included stew pots, mending lines, and knowing which stars lead home. Quilboar raids angered the town as thunder angers a tent, yet solutions came from vigilance and patience rather than panic. And the way the gate hinge turned without squealing said as much as the stance of its guards. The market translated survival into goods that could be carried and priced them according to the value of breath in a dry land, while troll apothecaries offered jars that trapped sunlight above remedies named for river stones. A Tauran elder tied cloth to a post as if securing memory against the wind. A goblin haggled with the energy of someone negotiating with the future, and a young orc asked for directions that turned out to be patience disguised as a map. News from Durotar arrived with heat and the iron scent of forges, and the stubborn hope of a city carving itself into rock, while Mulgore waited in the west like a soft answer to a hard question. Caravan wheels drew honest arcs in dust, and the public map faded, where many fingers traced the same route until the paper learned the shape of decision, while the inn served food that tasted of effort more than spice, the most reliable seasoning in the Barrens. Towards sunset, the town's angles softened, posts through long seams that stitched square to road, and torches matched the soil, so the outpost looked grown rather than built. Stories traded under the awnings carried more dust than exaggeration, which made them believable enough to pass on. The Crossroads did not claim safety like a mountain. It earned safety like a crew that trusts each other, and the watchstairs creaked the same way each time until the sound became a password shared by boards and boots. Roads spread like compass arms, East toward Durotar's promise, south unrolling patience, north rehearsing the long sentence that ends at ridges, and night lit the town with household glow rather than spectacle, a modest constellation refusing to waste fuel on vanity. Some called the outpost the hinge of central Kalimdor, and the metaphor worked because hinges and towns are judged by how doors move. Even the impatient learned to measure progress in safe returns and in maps inked accurately after the fact. The Barrens allowed the town because it respected construction that understood scale, and banners hung slack at noon and stirred at evening like thoughts remembered, while cleaver, anvil, and gate boots kept the same tempo. Reports of harpies and quillboar arrived like weather, and the Crossroads adjusted cloaks rather than declaring new climates, distributing resolve through small finished tasks, so defiance never needed to shout. Young warriors discovered that bravery here is a ledger balanced by waterskins and repaired straps. The inn's book recorded names in a spare hand that lent gravity, and when Horde banners gained cloth, the wall gained a nail with no complaint. Ratchet's supply trains clanked through with comic goblin dignity and serious relief. Wyvern masters soothed mounts in tones that would tame stubborn doors, and a child learned the perimeter by tracing the palisade with a stick and listening. Clouds gathered in the west and decided against rain without offending anyone. Messages from Orgrimmar described new forges and old arguments, while the Crossroads smiled in the way a town smiles, with shoulders set and chores steady. By dusk, the gateposts shone with oil from many hands, and each grip left a confession in the grain. The square emptied by degrees, and the outpost exhaled through the smell of banked coals. The watch renewed safety like a nightly vow. The palisade cast a sober crown across the road. So late arrivals walked beneath a benediction, and the town slept with one eye open and both hands occupied, dreaming of roads that returned what they borrowed. Morning began again with the logic of a hinge and the patience of a ledger, while the Barrens nodded once, because for a young Horde, this outpost was a quiet forge where metals learned purpose. The Crossroads stands not as a fortress defying the plain, but as an agreement with it, which is why it endures when louder places fall out of fashion. Every plank has heard a promise kept, every post has watched someone return, and such statistics make good walls. Travelers leave with more maps than they arrived with, none of them paper. And the horizon waits outside the gate like a task described honestly while the town refuses to blink. Because blinking is for gamblers, and this place invests. West of the safer tracks, the Thorn gathers in purposeful snarls, as if the earth were knitting armor, and the air cools by a whisper in the bramble's shadow, while the ground grows springy with hidden tunnels of a people who chose enclosure over horizon. Here, the Quillboar have written scripture in living spikes, a text that resists translation with deliberate cruelty. And the Warrens slant rather than descend, because this faith believes in angles that confuse strangers. Every thorn points outward at intruders, and inward at a fallen god whose story lies beneath every hoofprint, not recited but inhaled through dust that once tasted Agamaggan's blood. And from that reliquary, the Quillboar rose with cactus fury and named the Bramble Temple instead of trap. They hear insult in footsteps and answer with ambush, not from love of violence but from grief hardened into doctrine, while archways of thorn freeze like lightning and paths below accept only those who know pain as currency. Sap smells sharp enough to argue. Bones appear at the shadow's edge like pale signatures. A mask carved from boar skulls stares with fanatic patience, and hollow drums speak in a meter cut by tusk that remembers a god's last heartbeat. To the Quillbore, this tangle is civilization rather than refuge. Warriors move with certainty, learned in corridors that punish hesitation, and Razorfen Kraul opens like a wound that rehearsed closing and chose honest pain instead. Passages sag with vegetation that seems alive even when still. Ceilings sweat a thin condensation like a nervous confession, and elders recite bloodlines traced to the demigod, while faith here behaves as geography that burns tunnels curl toward Razorfen Downs, where the air chills with a wrongness no season owns, because the Scourge taught rot new alphabets and carved a few letters here. A bell tolls once without source, and its note takes the shape of regret, while candles of hardened sap twist smoke into narrow towers and let them fall as children watch devotion first and reason later. To them, the world beyond looks unfinished, so enclosure earns more trust than horizon, and the Barrens does not argue. It moves wind around the choice and continues. Heroes have ventured in to cut rot from the downs and left with edges on their voices that never dulled. And those who listened to the prayers learned that grievance can be as articulate as poetry. Outside the bramble, sunlight returns with the abruptness of truth told without preface, and the heat feels oddly clean, while the plain looks simple after Thorn logic, and the eyes need a moment to accept simplicity again. The Barrens' quiet proves not indifference but regulation, a wide law that keeps extremes from swallowing each other. And the Quillbore remain because Agamaggan's story refuses erasure, and the land grants them a parish of pain on the map. Travelers skirt the edges with respect when they can afford it, and the thorns never stop growing because grief seldom does. While between bramble and open plain, a ribbon of trampled ground records negotiations in bipartisan dust. The wind crosses without voting, and the grass bows without asking who passes. A single quill gleams like a black stitch that once held a wound together, and thorn shadows retract like claws that have made their point ahead. The land warms from green shadow back to honest red. The wind shortens a long sentence into mercy, and you understand that the Barrens hold shrines to survival in many dialects, some barbed. The road resumes its straight-faced persuasion, and the day continues with the confidence of ground that knows what it is, while a last thorn catches light and becomes past. The plain opens like a door with no hinge, and you step through because the Barrens always ask and never insist. Dust rises gently and forgives your footprint even as it records it, and your shadow lengthens enough to suggest afternoons somewhere prayers continue for a god who died bravely. Somewhere a hammer rings for a town that prefers mornings, and between them the road keeps its promise, while the plain keeps its counsel, so that your walk becomes the only answer required. The horizon receives you without ceremony, which is the land's highest honor. Thorn remembers behind you, distance forgives ahead, and underfoot the earth repeats its oldest sentence, continue. The air thickens as the road bends toward a hill whose mouth drinks light, and the first breath you draw at the entrance to the Wailing Caverns tastes of water that has forgotten what sunlight feels like. A slow drip counts seconds into a pool that answers with a sound like glass learning to become a river. Stone arches lean toward one another, as if sharing a rumor they do not want the desert to overhear. And your eyes adjust to a green dusk that proposes wonder and withholds reassurance. Once this was an honest oasis where green made its home without apology, and Naralex, a druid whose ambition wore gentleness like a cloak, believed he could invite the abundance of the Emerald Dream to cross into the Barrens so the land might remember generosity He descended with followers who trusted both his science and his sleep, and at first, reeds grew where brittle straw had surrendered, and frogs rehearsed old songs in keys the plain had forgotten. Yet the dream is an ocean that hides its storms, and when Naralex reached down his hand, he found the nightmare waiting with patient teeth and chi. Vines thickened into ropes that strangled their own trellises. Beasts that drank from the new pools wore colors no season had taught, and the druids of the Fang began to speak in a grammar that words do not use, their devotion bent by a pressure that calls itself love when it means possession. Every stalactite seems to listen for a command. Every echo sounds like an answer to a question you would rather not have asked. And the paths loop into themselves as if the cave were trying to dream you to a stop. Somewhere deeper, a chorus of water keeps time for a ceremony whose officiants no longer remember they started it. Naralex sleeps at the heart of the labyrinth, where the boundary between dream and waking thins like worn cloth, and those who have stood at the edge of his chamber say the air there carries green, bruised toward purple. To wake him is to risk everything if the nightmare still has its hand in his breath. Yet to leave him is to let the Barrens keep learning thirst from a teacher who never tires. Serpents move with the elegance of sentences that choose their commas carefully. Deviate creatures wear their disfigurements like medals issued by a king no one elected. And condensation perfumes the air with sweetness and rot as the dream pretends it is all things at once. Roots fumble down from the grottos like hands searching for a lost book, and in the lower chambers the floor takes your weight with the courtesy of a host who means to keep you longer than you planned. Strips of light from the surface carry dust as if the Barrens were trying to visit politely, and the beams fall across the water in bars that look like a jail for fish refusing to be punished. Adventurers pushed into these chambers and set themselves the proud task of breaking the nightmare's hold by waking the druid who had meant only good, and when at last he stirred, the caverns seemed to inhale in surprise. Yet even the best endings told in ratchet lose weight inland. To walk here now is to feel the bruise left by good intentions that did not consult consequence, and the bruise will never perfectly fade. When you emerge, the sun makes you blink as if waking from a dream you almost owned, and the plain receives you with dry breath and open eyes. Naralex remains below with an impossible project sleeping beside him. The Barrens above continues by the old arithmetic of shade and distance, and somewhere between them, gratitude lingers for the rumor that the world once offered water no one had to beg for. On the slope, you pause to hear the drip that will measure this place long after your footprints are persuaded into anonymity. And then you rejoin the red road, like a student who failed an exam and learned more from failure than a perfect score could have taught. Heat presses flatter as the path bends south. The ground darkens from brick toward the memory of fire, and the shape of the land stops being horizon and becomes an absence that refuses to be ignored. The cataclysm came like a verdict, and where there had been one Barrens, there are now two, divided by a scar that still speaks in the language of stone. The Great Divide cleaves the plain with a logic that does not seek permission, its edges gnawed by a giant with careless teeth, and bridges kink across the gap in spans of rope, timber, and pragmatism, while caravans cross them with the tense grace of signatures made under oath. To stand at the lip is to feel the planet's pulse transposed into an angry key, and to look down is to see geology that has forgotten politeness. Molten rivers once raged in this wound, and now idle in sullen threads, yet the heat that rises still tastes like metal and warning. North of the Divide, the Cenarian Circle and Horde settlers coaxed green back with water barrels, patience, and a grammar of respect, while south of the Divide, the soil kept the color of a clenched fist, and the road turned into a string of arguments, settled by fortifications and by margins too narrow for humility. The split sharpened old quarrels and gave them places to stand, and the wind along the brink carries rumors from both halves, as if trying to persuade the land to remember a single name. You cross a bridge and feel its planks answer your weight with honestly timed complaints. The drop beneath makes breath adopt accounting habits, and on the far side, a watch post keeps its roof low and its expectations realistic. In the south, fields of ash have been domesticated into roads. Scrub endures with the posture of veterans. Dwarven cuts at Baal Modan read like commas the earth would have preferred to omit, and the iron taste of machines argues with the old hymn of dust. To call the chasm a wound suggests healing the land has not signed, and perhaps it is better to call it a hinge on which two truths swing uneasily, that a dragon can break the world in an afternoon, and that people can live on either side of that knowledge with equal sincerity. Crossing back north, the air cools by a degree too small to measure, but too real to deny, and the grasses press against your boots like citizens reclaiming a street. The divide becomes a syllabus for the rhetoric of resilience. Shadows lengthen like arms reaching to pull the halves together, and light falls across the bridges in bars that make bold caravans behave like careful students. When you step away from the brink, the ground feels too level for a handful of strides, and then your body recalibrates, because the road prefers to be a task rather than a threat. Somewhere behind you, the chasm continues to breathe its heated breath into the afternoon, and somewhere ahead the air thins into something that smells first like memory and then like smoke. You understand that the next hour keeps the sound of drums in it, and you proceed with the deliberate calm of a traveler who knows that a map can be accurate and still not be kind. The southern wind arrives with the taste of old embers, and before the ruins appear, you recognize them because grief has a temperature the skin knows faster than the eyes. Camp Taurajo was never a citadel, because the Thorn do not build pride into walls, and what stood here were tents, racks, kilns, and totems that held more song than rule. What fell here were families who believed the night would be kind if they kept their promises to the day, and what remains is a hush the wind respects. The alliance column that came through carried certainty like a standard and purpose like a ration, and General Hawthorne, who would later speak the language of regret with fluency, marched soldiers through a settlement prepared for drought and quillbore, but not for the arithmetic of a map that called them supply lines. The attack was swift, because doctrine calls swiftness mercy, and when the fires were done, the Barrens added a new color to its red, and the wind learned a new route through spaces where roofs had been. Now the totems lean like elders who have decided to keep standing for those who cannot, their shadows drawing narrow sanctuaries where the sun is polite enough to soften. Beads, half melted into the sand, hold the last shape of a hand. A broken drum shell cups dust as if hearing was still possible, and the ground remembers footprints that ran toward horizons without time to look back. Survivors carried their stories north to the Crossroads and west to Mulgore, where those stories hardened into vows that do not untie even when seasons change. And Hawthorne's words reached no ear that could unclench the fist in the throat. You pass between burned circles where cooking fires once negotiated for flavor, and smoke prints your tongue with a history that refuses sweetening. A child's game etched into the soil by small hooves has been erased by wind except for one curved line. And you know better than to mistake it for a smile, because this land has taught too many alphabets of loss to misread one for another. Kodo, that survived the night's running, returned weeks later and stood at the edge of the ruins long enough to teach everyone watching the meaning of standing still. And in that stillness you can hear drums that are not sounding, voices that are not speaking, and mourning that is not asking permission. A traveler from Ratchet left a crate of clean water beneath a surviving awning without a note. Neutrality learning the grammar of respect, and a troll apothecary brought a salve that smelled of river stones and said nothing while giving it, because words are poor servants when houses forget their corners. You could say Taurajo fell because of strategy and not be wrong, but if you stop at strategy, you will never tell the truth, because what went missing cannot be charted, and what remains cannot be reconciled. The wind here carries two stories at once and refuses to collapse them into one, and you are required to listen with both ears, even when choosing a side would be easier. The Barrens does not permit forgetting, because forgetting is a luxury reserved for climates that do not punish distraction, and so Taurajo persists as a school for anyone who believes maps are innocent. A single shell bead rolls against your boot and settles where your shadow is thinnest, and the coincidence feels like a lesson you will not finish learning today. When you leave, you do not look back for a long time, not from fear, but from respect. Because in this place, memory is carried forward by footsteps, not by glances. At the ridge you pause, and the wind lifts a sigh from tents that are no longer there. And you say nothing into the air, because nothing is the only language worth speaking here. Night finds Taurajo first, because ashes cool fastest when the sun leaves, and the stars above this ground seem to lower themselves as if reading names. Somewhere far away, a commander finishes a sentence that includes the word necessary and sleeps. And somewhere closer, a Tauran mother finishes a sentence with the word always and does not sleep. And the Barrens holds both sentences because it knows how to keep two truths from fighting in the same mouth. When you turn north again, the road does not lighten beneath your feet, but it steadies, and steadiness is the Barrens' gift. The ruins dim into their proper darkness behind you, and the night broadens ahead into the shape of a world that will require more walking, more listening, and more careful sentences than any one traveler can carry alone. And still, you carry as many as you can. The drums you will hear later will include this silence in their rhythm. The songs you will hear later will include this ash in their vowels. And when dawn returns, it will light Taurajo with the same even hand it uses for cliffs and markets and bridges, because the sun is not a judge, only a witness with perfect attendance. You walk on, and the Barrens, satisfied with your attention, allows the horizon to advance by a breath. The northern road rises out of the heat haze until the palisades of Mor'shan Rampart stand against the sky like the ribs of a giant animal that learned to face the wind without flinching. And the path that brought you here feels suddenly narrower because borders always make distance seem like a decision rather than a fact. The Rampart watches the meeting place of two tempers. Behind you, the Barrens hold to their stern arithmetic of dust, thirst, and honest horizons, while ahead, the trees of Ashenvale begin to stitch green into the air with a confidence that has never asked this desert for permission. The guards at Mor'shan speak in voices tuned by long duty to the tone of caution instead of fear, and their armor carries the matte shine of metal that has been lifted more often than polished. for the work of this gate has never been ceremonial. This is where the Horde learned to breathe carefully, because the shadow of the forest contains old arguments that do not end simply by refusing to repeat themselves aloud. And every plank of the wall remembers nights when the wind from the north carried not only pine and rain, but also the flight of arrows whose purposes were older than treaties. You lean against the outer ditch and let the story of the Warsong clan climb the air in your mind. For even the sand here speaks their name in the clipped syllables of war drums. Gromash Hellscream strode this threshold with a blade that had known too much, and a heart determined at last to know the right amount. And the paths that disappear under Ashenvale's dark boughs carry the echo of his defiance, the way bark carries the memory of lightning. It was not in the Barrens that he met the Pit Lord. Yet the Barrens listened to the news as if it had happened on its own doorstep, because freedom purchased in one part of Kalimdor changes the way the sun opens every other part. The tale of Manaroth's fall reaches even these posts as a lesson and a warning, since every curse broken leaves behind the habit of listening for chains, and sentries at Mor'shan have learned to hear that phantom clink even on quiet afternoons. The Rampart keeps its discipline in the ordinary language of maintenance, in ropes that do not fray because someone replaced them before they did, in hinges that do not complain because oil was applied when no one was watching, in watch logs written without poetry because accuracy is the only music worth singing at a border. You understand that the outpost is less a wall than a way of breathing, in through patience, out through resolve, with lungs that refuse to panic, even when the tree line darkens, or the road brings dust, the color of news. Behind you, the Barrens lie open like a scripture that tolerates any reader who can endure sunlight. And ahead, the forest gathers secrets into shade, and Mor'shan stands between them as a translator who knows when not to embellish. When you finally step away, the post's silhouette holds its ground, with the modest pride of a hinge that has turned history without asking for applause, and the road bends west toward ridges that carry the taste of smoke, iron, and the kind of memory that prefers to be spoken after sundown. The road yields to low ridges, whose backs are stitched with hardy scrub, and the dry hills arrange themselves into a patient maze that seems determined to prove that the Barrens can fold, as well as stretch. Harpies ride the thermals here with a kind of laughing malice that the wind refuses to correct, and their nests prick the skyline like apostrophes in a story that interrupts itself too often to be polite. You pass beneath their circling grammar with the gait of someone who has learned that haste invites punctuation from the wrong editor. Down the slope, the stagnant oasis appears without warning, its surface still as a withheld answer, and you feel the temperature change along your wrists where the pulse is most honest. For even a reluctant pool persuades the body to hope. The water wears the tired gloss of survival rather than the sparkle of invitation. Yet reeds knit the edges with green thread, and a pair of beetles test the shallows, as if drafting a treaty between drought and persistence. Further west, the forgotten pools gather themselves into a basin of quiet where bubbles rise from the floor, with the unhurried insistence of a rumor that refuses to die. And the air carries a mineral sweetness that suggests the earth is telling its story from the beginning again. Tauren elders once knelt here to read the water's patience, and to show young hunters how reflection teaches accuracy without sharpening anything. And orc shamans stood silently nearby, measuring the silence until they could name it without fear. In the old days, Naralek sent his hopes along this corridor like a blessing, And some of that blessing still clings to the edges of the basin in the way moss chooses the shaded side of a stone, so that even when the day is at its hottest, your breath remembers to slow raptors cut across the flats with the arrogant certainty of creatures who wake already certain of their value, and the hyenas answer from the periphery with laughter so practiced it almost counts as religion. Yet the pools remain poised between these appetites and outlast the drama by refusing to acknowledge it. You kneel to watch the bubbles count their way toward the surface, and each little eruption seems to say a name you cannot catch. A roll call for those who traveled this road before maps thought to ask them for signatures. The Barrens often feels like a book with no illustrations, but here the water sketches quick portraits of clouds and birds and your own face, and you recognize in the distortion a kind of truth that straight lines neglect. When you finally stand, the air at your chest cools as if the pool had lent you a single breath for the uphill walk ahead, and the path leaves the basin with the reluctant kindness of a guest who knows the host is tired. You carry the idea of water with you until the wind turns hot again, and then you carry the memory of the idea, which is what most travelers in this country learn to do with the things they love. Southward, the land flattens and hardens, and then rises again into humiliations cut by engineers who believed speed could be squeezed from stone. And the road takes on a martial certainty that the horizon does not dispute desolation. Hold sits where arguments become structures, its timbers dark with smoke, and its spikes tipped for memory rather than for decoration. And the banners that wrap the outer walkways carry colors that have survived too many sunsets to be called bright. This is the hold that rose when the southern barons redefined themselves as a lesson in stubbornness, and it watches the old lines of march framed by dust and the angular patience of rebuilt bridges. The wind that fingers its ramparts speaks both Tauren and Orc and Goblin and a little Dwarven, because war teaches languages nobody chooses to learn. Across the south, the husks of Northwatch hold, and the trenches where Baal Modan scrawled its rude texts into the earth still write a taste of iron into the mouth, and the practical boards of Fort Triumph's memory lean in the air like an accusation that ran out of breath. Caravans arrive at Desolation Hold with the stooped relief of beasts that have delivered more certainty than trust, and their leaders count water, bolts, and converts in the same low tone used for prayers that expect no miracles. Under Garrosh Hellscream, the Barons were asked to feed a war like an anvil, asked to cradle an avalanche. And this strong point learned to measure loyalty by the width of a road and the punctuality of supply chains more than by the volume of a speech. Later, after the siege and the dissolving of those iron certainties, the same timbers stood and watched rebels and loyalists share the same shade, because shade forgiven is still shade. You walk the yard and read the dents in the parapet left by stones that should not have reached it. And a veteran points with two fingers and names the nights by wind direction rather than by calendar. And you realize that memory in the southern Barrens wears a uniform, even when no uniform is in sight. When the sun lowers its blade to the west, the shadows of the spikes draw a forest on the courtyard floor. And for a moment, the hold looks like the silhouette of a tree that decided to grow sideways to survive. Someone strikes a gong that sounds more like a bell, and the echoes travel the road the way cautious scouts do, checking both flanks and returning with a report, even when there is nothing to report. The night smells of oil, leather, and the last sweetness of a drink saved too long. And the road south breathes like a beast that has learned the cost of running. When you leave the hold, The guard at the gate lifts a hand not so much in farewell as in confirmation that the road still exists and that your feet still deserve it. And the plane answers with a lengthening cool that feels like an arm around the shoulders offered by someone who will not ask you to talk about it. Desolation does not mean emptiness here. It means the part of fullness that survived fire because it could not imagine doing otherwise. And that is a definition a traveler can live with. Darkness takes the Barrens not like a curtain falling, but like a tide, returning to reclaim a shore that never truly belonged to daylight. And the twin moons, calm watchers with different moods, lift from the east to silver the ridges that spent the afternoon pretending to be bronze. The heat exhales from the ground in waves so gentle they seem like forgiveness, and the insects begin their precise music that refuses to be hurried, and the far cries of hunters and the nearer hush of sleeping herds thread themselves into a tapestry you can fold around your thoughts without tearing it. The Thorn teach that the Earth Mother looks with both eyes upon this hour to count the miles walked by all creatures who chose quiet over argument. And standing in this light, you understand how even a warrior could call stillness a form of victory. The stars lean closer in the Barrens than they do in any city's sky and show you the old rivers in their bright negative channels of possibility carved through the dark, and you feel the thirst in your chest, not as complaint but as praise for the water you have already carried. Your steps make a different sound at night because the dust agrees to hold shape for one heartbeat longer, and the road seems to rise a finger's width to meet your boots as if the land itself wished to share the work for a little while. You keep your pace not by counting, but by listening to the distance between each sound and the next. And that distance teaches patience in a way no map ever will. In the east, the line of the coast refuses to be seen, yet finds a way to be smelled. And you imagine the lanterns of Ratchet like a fallen constellation pushing back the black with the vigor of a bargain made at a good price. In the west, Mulgore settles its shoulders beneath its grassy cloak and dreams the measured dreams of domesticated thunder. Somewhere beyond the northern gate of the Crossroads, a wyvern shifts on its perch and mutters a syllable that does not belong to any people. And somewhere south of the divide, a drum in Desolation Hold gives one polite answer to a question that no one actually asked, and the Barrens, pleased by such restraint, keeps the rest of the conversation in trust for morning. You pass a Kodo sleeping on its feet with the confidence of a fortress that never really believed in doors, and the beast sends a slow breath into the night that the air receives, like a letter written in a language every creature recognizes. A little farther on, a lion's call stitches a clean line through the dark, and across that seam, the insects pause and then resume, as if a conductor had tapped a baton. At a low rise, you stop and let the moons pour their pale grammar across the road, and you think of Naralex beneath the hills still trying to teach the dream to speak kindly to this country, and you think of Taurajo, where ash keeps its own calendar, and you think of Mor'shan, where watchfulness learned to hum instead of shout. And the night assembles these thoughts into a map that works in the dark as well as in the day. When the breeze freshens from the north, it brings the cold scent of trees. And when it freshens from the south, it brings the dry courage of stone. And between the two breezes, the Barrens balances you like a cup on a steady hand. You walk until the first rumor of dawn stains the eastern rim of the world with a very old gold, and the stars begin to bow out with the good manners of guests who never overstayed, and the moons accept the gentle demotion to memory in that gray hour when color is a promise rather than a fact. You understand why travelers speak about this land as if it were a person whose company steadies them, because the Barrens does not flatter and does not lie. and does not waste time pretending that hardship is unusual. The road ahead looks exactly as long as it needs to be, and no longer. And your heart accepts the measurement with a composure that yesterday would not have managed. When the first true light finds your face, it carries dust and forgiveness, and a very small hunger that is not for food. And you know that the day will keep you honest, which is all anyone should ask of a day. You take another step, and the step becomes a sentence. And the sentence joins the longer paragraph of this journey. And somewhere beneath your feet, the old magic that sleeps in the clay turns over and smiles without waking, because the Barrens likes to see travelers finish what they start.